A $3 powder that could stop rust permanently? No sanding, no grinding, no expensive coatings, no mechanic, no shop. Just a simple mix. Brushed onto steel and something wild happens. Corrosion doesn't just slow down, it changes. It stops behaving like rust at all. Now here's the part that makes people pause. Because this isn't a modern lab miracle. This idea traces back through centuries of craft, accident, and observation. And the surprising part is, it keeps showing up in completely different cultures that never spoke to each other. But before we get ahead of ourselves, think about what rust actually is. That orange flaky layer on steel isn't just dirt or wear. It's iron slowly reacting with oxygen and moisture, breaking itself down at the surface level. Once it starts spreading, it doesn't stop easily. That's why vehicles rot, tools fail, and metal gets replaced instead of repaired. Now imagine if that process could be chemically reversed, not covered up, not sealed away, but transformed into something stable. That's where tannins come in. Long before chemistry had a name for it, people working with plants already discovered something strange. When iron touched certain plant-based liquids, especially ones made from bark, leaves, or fruit skins, the rust didn't behave normally anymore. Instead of spreading, it darkened. It stabilized. It stopped flaking the same way. One of the most common sources of these compounds comes from oak bark, tea leaves, and many other plants rich in what we now call tannic acid. It's the same family of compounds that give strong tea its bitter taste and dark color. But the real story doesn't start in a lab. It starts in ancient workshops. In early civilizations, leather workers would soak animal hides in vats filled with plant extracts to preserve and strengthen them. These vats were full of tannin-rich water, and somewhere along the way, metal tools accidentally left inside those vats didn't behave like normal rusted iron anymore. They came out darker, cleaner, more resistant to corrosion. Blacksmiths noticed, craftsmen noticed, and slowly, across different regions of the world, similar methods began appearing. In simple terms, people didn't fully understand the chemistry, but they understood the result. And that result was consistent, plant-based solutions that interacted with iron oxide in a way that changed its structure. Modern chemistry eventually explained why. When tannic acid interacts with iron oxide, it doesn't just sit on top like paint. It reacts with the rust itself. Instead of continuing corrosion, the surface becomes chemically locked into a more inert state. And that distinction matters more than most people realize, because most rust treatments try to block oxygen from reaching metal. Paints, oils, coatings, they act like shields, but if that shield breaks, rust returns underneath. A tannin-based conversion works differently. It changes what the rust is, not a cover, a transformation. Fast forward into more modern history, and interest in these reactions becomes more formal. In the 18th and 19th centuries, chemists began isolating plant compounds and documenting how they interacted with metals. Tannic acid became one of the most studied natural substances in early industrial chemistry because of its strong binding behavior with iron. By the time industrial manufacturing expanded, rust had become a massive economic problem. Steel structures, machinery, transportation systems, everything depended on controlling corrosion, so coatings, primers, and synthetic inhibitors became a huge industry. But here's where things get interesting in a practical sense. Even today, many commercial rust converter products rely on tannin chemistry at their core. If you read the ingredients closely on certain rust treatments, you'll often find tannic compounds or related derivatives. They're usually blended with resins or solvents to improve application, durability, and appearance, but the underlying reaction is still the same principle discovered centuries ago. That's why a small amount of raw tannic acid powder can be so powerful when used correctly. It doesn't paint over rust, it converts it. And the process is surprisingly simple. A small measured amount of tannic acid is mixed with warm water until it dissolves. The liquid usually turns a dark brown, similar to strong tea. That solution is then applied directly to a rusted metal surface after light cleaning. Almost immediately, something visible begins to happen. Orange rust starts shifting darker, turning deep brown, then almost black in some cases. That color change isn't cosmetic, it's the chemical conversion taking place on the surface layer of iron oxide. As the solution dries, the converted layer becomes more stable, less porous, and more resistant to moisture exposure. Once fully cured, the surface can often be painted, sealed, or coated for additional protection. But the key point is this: The rust is no longer actively rusting in the same way. It has been chemically altered into a more stable form. Now, is this magic? No. Is it universal? Also no. Heavy structural corrosion, deep pitting, or severely degraded metal still requires replacement or professional repair. No chemical converts missing steel back into solid material. But for surface rust, early corrosion, tools, frames, and equipment maintenance, tannin-based conversion has been a known and practical method for a long time. And that brings us to why it keeps coming up in so many different places. Because nature produces tannins everywhere. Forests, tea plantations, fruit skins, bark extracts. Different cultures discovered similar solutions independently because the raw materials were always around them. It wasn't one invention, it was repeated observation. That's often how the most practical science begins. Not in laboratories, but in workshops, kitchens, and fields where people are just trying to make metal last a little longer. Today, the same chemistry shows up in industrial rust converters, restoration work, automotive repair, tool maintenance, and conservation projects. The packaging might look modern, the branding might sound advanced, but the underlying reaction is still rooted in a very simple interaction between plant-derived compounds and iron oxide. And that's the real takeaway here. Sometimes the most powerful solutions aren't the most complicated ones. They're just the ones that survived long enough to be rediscovered, reformulated, and repackaged for a modern world. A $3 powder isn't a miracle cure for everything metal related, but in the right context, it represents something much bigger. A reminder that not every problem needs an expensive system. Sometimes it just needs the right chemistry applied at the right time. And if you've ever dealt with rust on tools, vehicles, or outdoor gear, you already know how frustrating it can be watching metal slowly disappear in front of you. The idea that it can be stabilized instead of replaced, that alone changes how you look at it. Because once you understand what's actually happening at the surface level, rust stops feeling like a permanent failure and starts looking like a process you can interrupt. That's where this story really ends up. Not with mystery, but with chemistry that's been sitting in plain sight for centuries. If you found this breakdown interesting, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into hidden science, forgotten methods, and the real explanations behind things most people overlook. There's a lot more buried knowledge out there, and the next one might change the way you see something completely ordinary again.